As usual, in this particular lecture, I want to warn you that the content of this lecture is based on the Contract Act 1872. So if, for instance, you're studying English law, then please don't watch this lecture as this might confuse you since the details are a little bit different. For instance, in English law, as we all know, we do recognize the differences between innocent versus negligent versus fraudulent misrepresentation. But under the Contract Act 1872, which is followed in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, there is no such difference as such listed in the Act itself. And even though for most purposes the differences can be reconciled so that the Act itself can also be read, that is construed so as to include these three categories of misrepresentation, but to avoid confusion I will strictly only be referring to the definition in the Contract Act 1872. Right, so with that out of the way, let's start right away with the differences between fraud and misrepresentation. I've already made another detailed lecture discussing the difference between misrepresentation and mistake. So in this lecture, we're only going to be strictly discussing the differences between fraud and misrepresentation. Before I discuss the differences, let me tell you that one major similarity between these two is that the contract is going to be voidable at the option of the party whose consent has been obtained by fraud or misrepresentation. Since this point is very important, let me repeat it once. So as per the Contract Act 1872, when the consent of a party, because remember this topic broadly comes under the topic of free consent, so here we're talking about whether or not the parties gave their consent freely. So when the consent of a party to the contract has been obtained either by fraud or by misrepresentation, then the result is the same, which is that the contract is voidable, not void. So in other words, the contractual remedy for both is the same, although there is a difference which we're going to discuss shortly. Okay, so speaking of the differences, first and foremost, logically and conceptually, like I've already mentioned, fraud is simply dhoka and misrepresentation is simply galat bayani. Now let's look at the very first point that is mentioned on the slide. So first point to notice is that obviously both in misrepresentation and in fraud the statement is false, but the key point to notice and remember is that in fraud the false statement is made by a person who knows that it is false, or he or she does not believe in its truth anyways. And despite being unsure of the truth of the statement, or despite knowing very well that the statement is false, despite that the person goes on to make that statement, that is outright fraud. However, misrepresentation is the case where the person making the statement believes it to be true. So essentially the idea is that in fraud, the person who is making the statement doesn't just know that it is false, but has the intention to deceive the other party. Obviously, why would he or she go on to make a statement that is false, that he or she knows to be false, if he does not have that intention? So in fraud, the party making the false statement has the intention to deceive the other party, whereas in misrepresentation, the party making the statement is usually innocent and has no intent to deceive the other party as such. So let's say that where a person is selling a car to another person and he or she knows that the car has been through an accident because of which the car has been damaged, and the person selling the car simply paints it and gets it repaired so that at the time of sale the other person is unable to see the defects, that is the damages. So in this particular situation, the person who is selling the car obviously has an intention to deceive the other party by making a false statement that the car is not damaged at all. But let's say that in this situation, if we change the facts a little bit, the person making the statement has also bought that car from another person who had not told him about the defects, and in this situation the person who is selling the car to you does not himself know about the fact that certain defects, the certain damaged parts have been concealed using fresh paint. So this person who is selling the car to you now is not aware of the fact that the car is in fact damaged, so he or she just states something which is false, that is the car is in a very good condition, and he or she is making some false statement, but this person making the statement does not know that the statement is in fact false. He or she definitely believes in the truth of the statement and is making it without any intention to deceive you, that is the party to whom they are selling the car. So this is simply a case of misrepresentation and not fraud. So hopefully this example has clarified the very first difference between fraud and misrepresentation. Now speaking of the second difference, which deals with remedies. So this one is very simple. Like I've already said, the main remedy, that is the contractual remedy for both fraud and misrepresentation, is the same, that is the contract becomes voidable. And if you don't remember, voidable means that the contract can be continued at the option of the aggrieved party, that is, if the party who has been aggrieved may either decide to continue with the contract, or the aggrieved party can simply say that the contract is void and they don't want to continue with it anymore. So basically the idea is, in a voidable contract, one of the parties, that is the party who has been the target of the fraud or misrepresentation, the party has the option to make the contract void if they so decide. But of course, if they feel that the fraud or misrepresentation was of a degree or of a nature that doesn't really affect the contract and that they are fine with it, and for whatever reason they decide to go ahead with the contract and continue to perform, then in this situation they are free to do so, which is why we say that such a contract is voidable at the option of the aggrieved party whose consent has been obtained either by fraud or by misrepresentation. Right, so to this extent, both fraud and misrepresentation are the same. However, the difference lies in the fact that in the case of fraud, not only does the contract become voidable, that is, not only does the party who has been the target of fraud has the right to cancel the contract, but in addition to that, that particular aggrieved party can also claim damages as a matter of right, that is, this particular party is entitled to claim damages as a matter of right. However, in the case of misrepresentation, this is not so. So the party obviously does have the option to avoid the contract, which is why, like I said earlier, in misrepresentation also the contract is voidable. However, in the case of misrepresentation, the aggrieved party is not entitled to damages, by which I mean to say that damages are not available as a matter of right. So basically the aggrieved party can obviously of course avoid the contract, but damages are only and only payable at the discretion of the court. And by discretion of the court, I simply mean to say that it is going to be up to the court in that particular case, on a case-by-case basis, whether or not that particular aggrieved party should be awarded damages. Why? Because damages are not available as a matter of right, so you can't just claim damages. You are not entitled to it unless the court decides that yes, you are going to be awarded damages. But in the case of fraud, you are going to be entitled to damages as a matter of right. So I hope the differences between fraud and misrepresentation are now clear to you.